All right, this video is an example of what a fourth quarter project might look like. And the fourth quarter project extends what you did in the third quarter and just looks at data that perhaps you've already obtained in a different way. I will say that this presentation I put together pretty quickly. I didn't focus on the appearance of the presentation. It's pretty bare bones, which is fine, but you're certainly welcome to make it a little bit more snazzy looking graphics and sound and music or whatever you want to do. But anyway, my project is going to look at the impact of offensive strikeouts in baseball. So in baseball, it's clearly not a good thing for the offensive team to strike out. It's a bad thing, but we sort of want to quantify how bad is it. When you strike out, you make an out. So when you make an out, that's not good. But you also don't put the ball in play, and you don't give the other team an opportunity to make a mistake. So these are reasons that we might see a relationship between strikeouts and success or lack of success for an offensive team. Why do I care? Well, you probably know I'm a varsity baseball coach at EKTest. This year, in particular, we have focused a lot of time in practice on what we'll say called two-strike hitting. We're trying to reduce the number of strikeouts that we have. So, is this time well spent? What do the data indicate? Now, as far as research goes, your project should look at research about the topic that you're talking about. There's a ton of research about baseball statistics. There's a whole branch of sort of baseball statisticians called sabermetricians, which really look at what's going on in the game of baseball. And if you've seen the movie Moneyball or read the book Moneyball, you see that this general manager for the Oakland A's has sort of taken that approach to try to help his small market team gain some competitive advantage. The Cubs hired Theo Epstein a couple years ago as their general manager, and he's a guy who has really sort of taken this approach to managing a baseball team. So there's a lot of research out there, in fact, an overwhelming amount of research about baseball statistics. And so as far as this topic goes, in 1998, Boros McCracken, who's a sabermetrician, came out with a study talking about the impact of strikeouts for pitchers. Okay, so this is from a defensive perspective, and his argument was that once a batter hits the ball, puts the ball in play, the pitchers have no control. Okay, therefore, teams should search for pitchers who are going to get as many of their outs as possible from strikeouts. Okay, and so if strikeouts are good for the defense, then they must be bad for the offense. So now the thing about his study is that there's been many articles and blogs that really criticize McCracken's study. That says that he is overemphasizing the impact of a strikeout, particularly from the defensive perspective. So as far as Major League Baseball goes, strikeouts are really on the rise. People are striking out more and more than ever. And the consensus is that they are not as big a deal as you might think. I mean, generally players who hit more home runs strike out more. Home runs are obviously good. Home runs attract fans. Home runs are exciting. And so that's one of the reasons that you might be seeing this. And so teams are willing to strike out more often if it means more big hits. Players are taking big swings these days. But here's another piece of research that I found from an article online, and there's tons of them, about why strikeouts stink. And this person was arguing that perhaps the current thinking is underestimating the impact of strikeouts. And so this chart shows people's home run totals, this is on average, and what their batting averages are, and what their strikeout rates are. This is the percentage of plate appearances with a strikeout. And so the red values here are below average batting averages. And what you see is that when players strike out more than 25% of the time, there's a lot of low batting averages. Okay, so he's arguing that strikeouts are pretty bad, and this is from an individual player perspective. Okay, so there's lots of research out there about this topic, and your project should highlight just some of what you might find. Okay, as far as data collection, we're going to actually use the statistics from this year's ETHS varsity baseball team. We played 30 games so far. We can consider these 30 games as perhaps a representative sample of all high school games, but we have to take caution that it is only one season, it's only one team, it's this team, so I don't know how much we can extrapolate, but it'll certainly be interesting. Here's an example of some of the team data that we have. You can see that we have game-by-game results. We have whether we won or lost. We have the number of plate appearances we had as a team, the number of runs we had as a team, the number of strikeouts we had as a team, the percentage of times we struck out as a team. And what you can see is that we've struck out about 20% of the time this year, which is a little bit less than we did last year. Last year was about 24%. And we're doing much better this year than we did last year, generally. So this is what we have from a team perspective. From an individual perspective, now I omitted these names because I don't necessarily want people to make people feel bad or good about their statistics this year. We have, for each player, their statistics. We have their batting average. This is essentially the percentage of times that that player gets a hit. We have the strikeouts per plate appearance, and so these are kind of the two things we're looking at here. This is from an individual player perspective, so we can sort of assess how strikeouts affect other offensive statistics for an individual player. All right, so what are we going to do statistically here? First thing we're going to do is we're going to run a linear regression t-test to see if there's a relationship between runs scored and strikeouts per game from an offensive perspective. You would think that the more strikeouts you have as a team, the less runs you would score. We're going to see if that is statistically significant or if that's even true. We're also going to look at the number of strikeouts that we've had as a team in the wins that we've had versus the number of strikeouts we've had when we lose. Is there a statistically significant difference between those things? And then from an individual player perspective, we're going to see if there's a relationship between the individual's batting averages and the number of strikeouts they have. You would think that the more a person strikes out, the lower their batting average would be. Is that true? Okay, so if we do the first test, we're going to look at strikeouts and the number of runs that we score per game. We're going to run a linear regression t-test. And the parameter we're interested in is the true slope between runs in a game and strikeouts in a game. And our null hypothesis is that the slope, the relationship is 0. And our alternative hypothesis, and I believe this is a typo, is that the relationship or the slope is negative, meaning the more runs we score, the less strikeouts we have. Okay? So here's what the data show, and what we can see from the scatter plot here is there appears to be a negative relationship. It looks like games where we've scored a lot of runs, at least especially this game here, we haven't had many strikeouts, and then when we strike out a lot, we tend to score less runs. Okay, there's many reasons for that. Okay, so when we ran the regression, we actually got a significant relationship here. The p-value is 0.025. That means at the 5% significance level, there appears to be significant evidence of a correlation between runs scored and strikeouts. Specifically, if we look at the slope here, the model predicts that for every additional strikeout per game, we can expect about 0.6 fewer runs in the game. So that means if you strike out twice, if you can reduce your strikeouts by 2 per game, we predict you'll score about 1.2 more runs per game. That's quite a bit. Now, we did see in that original scatter plot that this point in this game right here, we scored 20 runs and we only struck out once. How much of an impact is that 1 point having on our model? That was against a very bad team. I think it was the second game of the year. And we did really well. So if we do that, we see that our p-value is now 0.096, and our slope is now down to 0.4. So we're no longer statistically significant when we remove that 1 point, but that is a valid data point. It was actually a game that we played. We do need to keep in mind that our sample size is only 30, and maybe our test is just not powerful, and I mean that statistically, to detect a relationship. So the second thing we said we would do is we would look at the average number of strikeouts that we have when we win versus when we lose. It certainly feels like that when we lose, we strike out more. But do the data indicate that? So we're going to do a two-sample t-test, comparing the means when we win and we lose, and we predict, or our alternative is that we strike out less when we win than when we lose. Okay, here's the data. And what we can see is that in the 11 losses we've had, we have struck out about 7.18 times per game on average. And in the 19 wins we've had, we've struck out 5.42 times per game. Clear, I mean, those means are different. We do strike out less on average when we win, but there's also a lot of variability of the number of strikeouts we have when we win. Okay, so how is that going to impact the test? We can see that when we run the test, we do not get a significant difference. The p-value is close to 0.05, but it's a little bit more. At the 10% significance level, we would reject the hope. So we're not concluding yet that we strike out more on average. The sample size is small. Again, our test might lack power. As far as the confidence intervals goes, we see that the confidence interval is between negative 0.5 and 4.06. So zero's in that interval. So there certainly could be no difference. There certainly could be negative difference. If we move that confidence level to 87.6%, then our result becomes significant. And now, finally, let's look at the impact of strikeouts on individual player statistics. So we're going to look at batting average for a player versus strikeouts. We're going to restrict our analysis to players who have only over 30 plate appearances per game. If we take a couple guys who maybe have only batted about 10 times, that might have an undue impact on the data. So we're going to take those players out of the analysis that don't have over 30 plate appearances. And we're looking at the slope between batting average and strikeouts, and we are hypothesizing, our alternative is that there's a negative relationship. Now, looking at this, we see a very interesting result here that our lowest batting average, or one of our lowest batting average, has the lowest strikeouts per plate appearance. And we have all these players in the middle where our high batting averages are that have higher strikeouts per plate appearance. When we do the regression analysis, understandably, we don't reject the null, and it's not even close. Now, this player here, if we remove them, what happens? Now we see a negative association, but it's not significant. Okay? So, I'm going pretty quick here. We summarize this. The results are statistically significant. When we look at runs scored and strikeouts per game, the relationship between them. We'll remove the 20-run game. There's not much of a relationship, and the results are not significant for anything else. Now, data are inconclusive here. There is some evidence, though not necessarily statistically significant, that strikeouts impact scoring runs and winning. This conclusion is from a team perspective. But there's not evidence that strikeouts predict individual success as measured by batting average. We conclude that there is much, my conclusion is that there's much more impact on the team when you strike out than there is on the individual, which is interesting. So, and now we're going to get dizzy here. Okay. So this backs some of the current sabermetric thinking that strikeouts are not as big a deal. Teams are willing to pay for big hitters who may strike out. And then I'm saying further study should be done to see which statistics strongly correlate with strikeouts. Clearly, some strikeouts are worse than others. When you strike out with guys on base, that's not good. So perhaps things that could be done is to look at the average runs per inning when the inning starts with a strikeout, when the strikeout occurs with runs on base, and so forth. And then other things that could be done is to assess the team impact here. One big thing about this is that our data is from a high school season. Clearly, high school is different than Major League Baseball. Players in the major leagues tend to not make that many errors. Players in high school do. So it'd be interesting to do that. So, okay.